Welcome to the 5th video in my villain analysis series, logically being dropped on Christmas because if there's one thing that gets me thinking villainous thoughts, it's the holidays.
Failure.
Specifically though, today we're taking a look at villains with a god complex. Characters who believe themselves to be above all others in terms of power, ability, intellect, virtue, or any number of other attributes. Or in some cases, characters who genuinely believe themselves to be a god. Today, it's all about the characters who believe in their own hype and think themselves to be superior to all of those around them.
The f***'s a commie?
Basically God.
But I'm still here!
Do you really believe your own hype that much?
I am the hype!
Now, there's something really great about this archetype when done correctly. Oftentimes, these characters are something special. They might genuinely be geniuses or once-in-a-lifetime talents, so the idea of them being better than others in some regards is founded in something. However, it's that extra little push beyond simple confidence that moves them into this category. They don't just think, I'm smarter than other people. They think, I am super smart, and that makes me better than other people. It is confidence with just a dash of narcissism that makes them believe themselves to be better than other people in their entirety. Rarely do these people recognize that everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and instead they only see their gifts as a basis to put themselves above others. And speaking of people who have egos that are entirely too big, this video is sponsored by me. If you don't know, I recently set up memberships for the channel, so if you're looking to support me in any way and want to help me get more content out, please consider becoming a member. I'll go into this a bit more in a video this week, but the plan for the upcoming year is to release one how to write video just like this one each month, as well as doing a deep dive into a series that is close to my heart, just like the 2.5 hour long one I made for Inuyasha. This is a rough outline of what is to come, but if I want to make 3 or 4 hours of content each month, I'm going to need your help. This will allow me to keep hiring editors like Dakota to help with some of the editing, or thumbnail artists like Gob so we don't end up with stinkers like this. Obviously, if you aren't in a position to spend money, do not worry, it is totally fine, my dude. But if you want to tip me a cup of coffee worth of money each video, I would be extremely grateful. Okay, back to the video. The term God complex is actually newer than you might think, first being coined by Ernest Jones in the early parts of the 20th century, and typically referring to someone who believes themselves to be on the level of a god, or just generally superior to all others. Of note is that this typically is in reference to a monotheistic, perfect, and all-powerful god, rather than any minor gods or pantheistic ones. Regardless, there are plenty of ways to do this style of character. They can be filled with bravado, disinterested in the world around them, overly confident, or even used for comedic effect when their beliefs aren't well-founded. But these characters, when done right and taken seriously, can often be summed up in 2 words: impressive and intimidating. They can feel larger than life or make the cast and audience feel small and insignificant. But in general, these characters allow for the demonstration of the protagonist's growth, or to allow an author to play around with characters who just aren't average people. The higher a power level of a series becomes, the more likely that a character with a god complex will appear within it. That said, I think this concept is often blown out of proportion. It doesn't have to be a monumental thing. It doesn't even particularly have to be evil. A god complex can quite simply be the genuine belief that you are better than those around you. Escanor from Seven Deadly Sins, Gojo in Jujutsu Kaisen, or Sesshomaru from Inuyasha are all examples of characters who have a god complex thing going on, all believing themselves to be better than everyone and everything around them. However, none of these characters are inherently evil. So real quick, let's talk about the criteria in how I define a character with a god complex. Firstly, they think or know that they are superior to others. Second, this feeling of superiority takes shape in a negative way. If you look at Kakashi teaching young Naruto, for example, Kakashi knows he is stronger than this kid is, but there isn't anything negative being produced from it. He doesn't look down on him for being younger, weaker, or less experienced, and he instead acts as a mentor towards them. So despite being superior, he obviously doesn't have a god complex, which is why the negative expression is so important as a differentiator. And third, there is a difference between a character with a god complex and a godlike character. Superman, for example, is a godlike character. He is effectively a god on Earth, but he doesn't have a god complex. At the same time, a character can literally be a god and still demonstrate a god complex. The general rule in this case is that the more anthropomorphized and human that a god is, the easier it is to present them as having a god complex. For example, the Greek and Nordic gods are often shown to have more human traits in storytelling. They get jealous, they get angry and lustful and all that fun stuff. So it's easy to play with them having this idea of toxic superiority. But on the other hand, we have characters like Truth in Fullmetal Alchemist, who doesn't really show off these negative traits and feels more godly than godlike. Anyways, the baseline has been set, the timestamps are available if you're looking to skip spoilers, but with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the characters we are talking about today. In today's video, we're going to be covering Muzan Kibutsuji from Demon Slayer, Light Yagami from Death Note, Griffith from Berserk, Makima from Chainsaw Man, Omni-man from Invincible, Daiki Aomine from Kuroko No Basket, Dio Brando from Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Homelander from The Boys, and Atreus from God of War. Before we get into the actual list, I want to talk about some honorable mentions that popped up a lot in the previous video's comments. These being Father from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Meruem from Hunter x Hunter, and Enel from One Piece. These are all fantastic examples, but I cannot keep using these guys in every single video. You guys will get bored of me. Other than those, we had Gilgamesh from Fate, Pegasus from Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Lelouch, and like so many others. But you guys see how long this video is already, and while those characters definitely are also great examples, they kind of overlap with a lot of what I have to say here. Plus, I'm at least trying to do more varied series here and there, so cut me some slack if you can. Okay, starting things off, I want to talk about Muzan Kibutsuji from Demon Slayer, because he, I think, is the perfect example of a failed god complex character, or at least a character who has a god complex, but displays it in a very unsatisfying way. Demon Slayer is set in the early 1900s Japan, with the caveat that there are both demons running wild at night, and demon slayers who are trying to protect humanity by killing demons. And these demons kind of work on vampire rules for some reason. Firstly, they cannot get caught in sunlight or they'll turn to ash, and second, there's this kind of pyramid scheme style hierarchy within the demons themselves, all coming to a peak with the original demon, Muzan. Also, shout out to the 40 people who have already commented that he looks like Michael Jackson. Very funny, super original, all 40 of you are very unique. And speaking of which, Muzan's story itself is kind of played out as well. I mean, to some degree, it's also even the plot of Morbius, as much of a meme as that is, as well as dozens and dozens of other stories. But basically, hundreds of years ago, Muzan was born as a very sickly child, to the point where his heart had stopped several times before even being born. And even when he was born, he was pronounced dead immediately as he had no pulse and wasn't breathing. However, as he was taken to be cremated, he gasped his first breath and started to cry. And despite how we will see him later, I want you to remember this image of him. Muzan is someone who is weak, who is sick, and who has experienced death, and despite living hundreds of years, he never grew beyond this. As he got older, his illness would persist, and he developed a very powerful fear of dying, ultimately being vindicated when he was diagnosed with a disease that would kill him before he turned 20. Terrified and willing to do anything, Muzan subjected himself to experimental medicine, but even so he saw no improvement, at least not at first, and in a fit of rage he murdered the doctor. But over time he would find that things had indeed changed. Muzan's body began to feel stronger and more powerful. He had been cured. But now he suddenly had a desire to consume human flesh, which, personally, a bit of a yikes for me, but to Muzan, this wasn't an issue as long as he could keep living. The bigger problem was that he was unable to walk into sunlight without being burned away. Now, here's the bit of irony to his story. Remember the doctor that he just killed? Well, it turns out that this medicine was meant to be part of a full treatment process, and that Muzan had only received the first doses. And to complete the rest of this treatment, he would need to create a medicine using a nearly mythical flower called the blue spider lily. Muzan would spend the rest of his life searching for this flower, not knowing that it only bloomed a few times a year, and even then only during the day, meaning it was always out of his reach, and that killing his doctor had sealed away any chance of him actually being cured. That said, as long as he stayed out of the sunlight and he didn't have all of his multiple brains and hearts destroyed at once, which is a story in its own right, but he was effectively immortal. At this point, he was stronger than all of humanity. He couldn't die, he had no real weaknesses, and couldn't become ill. He was just about perfect. Obviously, his goal would always be to find that blue spider lily so he could become truly immortal, but all the same, he saw himself almost like an evolution to humanity and looked down on everyone else. But then he comes across Yorichi, the sun-breathing demon slayer, who absolutely knocks him on his ass. Muzan would basically blow himself up and scatter his body into thousands of tiny pieces to get away from the attacker, but even so, Yorichi managed to destroy almost every single piece. The few small sections that did survive, though, would be enough to completely rebuild his body. But the damage had already been dealt, and Muzan was reinstilled with his fear of death. This would cause him to go into hiding for the next several hundred years, and relying on creating demon underlings to complete his tasks as he guided them from the shadows. And herein lies the issue that I have with Muzan. Admittedly, having a nearly immortal character whose big thing is being afraid of dying is a very cool idea. It's very compelling. The problem comes in when you push this fear too far, and it almost feels absurd, because then that character that should feel larger than life to accommodate the god complex he has, instead feels like an unreasonable coward. Hundreds of years after Yorichi died, Muzan was still terrified of him. So much so that even though there weren't any other demon slayers with his abilities, he would still sit in hiding. And if Muzan wasn't actually as powerful as he was, then this might be okay. But in the final arc, we see how strong he is. This man who was cowering away took an army of demon slayers, on top of every remaining Hashira, on top of being specially poisoned to be weakened and forced to age thousands of years over the fight, on top of having a form that protected him from the sun, and it was still a miracle that the demon slayers won. The list of bullshit and powers that he presents in this fight are unbelievable. And then even after he died, he shows that he could infuse his blood and memories into somebody else and conquer the sunlight through that, which has its own issues, but like, this guy is so powerful that the fear he shows doesn't make sense. And yes, a new Yorichi or a new Sunbreather could have shown up, but even so, it seems like it would be incomparable. I'm not saying Muzan needed to go around with a sign that says, "Hey Demon Slayers, here I am." But the idea of being so afraid and hiding away as much as he does, all while looking down on other people in the way that he does, just feels pathetic. And pathetic isn't super conducive to demonstrating a god complex character. It can be done well, as we see in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I've talked about this in the past, but in that show, the point is to show the flaws in Father's perspective. In wanting to become greater than humanity, he instead gave up his humanity and became less than it, and that leaves him as a pathetic dwarf. But Muzan's perspective of superiority is meant to be taken deathly seriously the entire time, and when it is challenged, he is straight up shown to be immensely more powerful and unstoppable than he was even built up to be the entire time. Through the whole series, everyone is like, Muzan is a 10 out of 10 power, we cannot fight him. And Muzan's like, nah, I am an 11 out of 10. But then he starts the fight, and it's more like a 23 out of 10. It is unbelievable how powerful he is, and it just doesn't make sense. The best way I can kind of compare this would be by putting The Rock in the ring with just a bunch of kindergartners. And then he does one of his big bravado speeches talking about how he could beat up hundreds of kindergartners, but then the bell rings and he starts hiding from them. It is such a weird, mixed message where they both want us to be afraid of Muzan, but to acknowledge that he is a complete coward. And I think if you're going to be working with a character who has a god complex, and especially one who is meant to intimidate the audience, you want clear, direct messaging that shows them to be as great and imposing as they are telling us they are. How are we supposed to take this character seriously when they don't even believe what they're saying? If a character believes themselves to be better, show that they are better. If they look down on humanity as though they are ants, do not make them afraid of ants. It takes away any sense of integrity in the presentation, and to me at least, that just doesn't work. But now let's move on to a character I think is everyone's go-to example when we think of an anime person with a god complex, and that is Light Yagami from Death Note. The series follows a young genius, Light, as he is given the Death Note, a mystical book that allows him to kill anyone whose name is written inside of it, as long as he thinks of the person's face while writing it. And right off the bat, we need to talk about who Light is for a second. Like I said, he is a genius. He has always been the smartest person in the room, and there has never been a debate about that. And intellect is a really interesting thing for characters to have because it immediately creates a dynamic between them and everyone else. And that's because there's this weird, unspoken tangibility when you're talking to someone who is either much smarter or much dumber than you are. I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've either said something stupid or heard someone else say something stupid, and everyone else just kind of pauses for a moment, and in that moment of silence, there is a hierarchy. For most people, that's just part of life, and we understand that, yeah, we're either smarter or dumber than that person. It is how it is, we don't judge too harshly because tomorrow will be on the other side of that equation. But Light doesn't really have that equalization factor going on. He is always the smartest. He has never been put in his place, and he looks down on others because of that. But at the start of the story, this is pretty inoffensive. Yeah, he has a casual air of superiority, he knows he's the smartest, but he's not trying to make a big thing about it, right? But intellect also has another trait. It's one of the 3 characteristics that typically go into leadership, those being intellect, which can be either emotional or technical, power, which can be physical, financial, or societal, and charisma. In general, if you are choosing a leader, you want them to have one or more of these traits, and Light at the outset has that intellect part down pat. He's also extremely charismatic, everyone loves this dude. But while his smarts do create a bit of interpersonal power, he doesn't really have any power outside of that. That is, until he gets the Death Note. Then he suddenly has a very real, very tangible power. At this point, Light has the power over life and death. He is smarter than everyone else, and he has the charisma to win over just about anyone. He is, on paper, the ideal leader, and he sees that. So he decides on a path forward based on the 3 things he believes in. Firstly, the world is rotten, it's filled with crime and evil, and the current system is not working. Second, he has the power to rid the world of criminals and to scare future evildoers to the point where they're too afraid to hurt others. And third, as he is the smartest, the most powerful, and the only one willing to make the decisions that he feels necessary, that grants him the right to become a pseudo-god of the new world that steers humanity in the right direction. And when we talk about Light, there's always going to be the discussion of the ends justifying the means, and we've talked about it in the past as well, but it's used in a really interesting way with Light specifically. Because we have this understandable philosophy attached to this character, many people end up watching the series and thinking that Light is in the right. They believe that he should make himself a god if it means leading to a utopia. And making a villain with a god complex that the audience can actually side with is just phenomenal. People really do view him as a savior, which kind of bleeds into that messiah complex as well. He is the savior, he can bring change to the world, and that's why he has the right to put himself above others. At least in his own mind. However, Death Note also has another trick up its sleeve, and it's the biggest pull that the series has to offer. The story doesn't just follow one person with a god complex, it actually pits him against L, who is equally genius and also presents himself as a savior who cleans up criminals that no one else could, and who looks down on the criminals he is pursuing because he knows he is objectively smarter and better than they are. L follows the more traditional justice system, while Light instead becomes his own system of justice. But it kind of forms this unstoppable force meeting an immovable object vibe, where the 2 people who believe themselves to be superior push each other to their limits, revealing and exploiting each other's weaknesses, showing they aren't perfect, and exposing all of the flaws that are hidden by all of their overconfidence. Of course, Light would eventually manage to defeat L, and this just acts as a means of doubling down on his belief. This whole time he thought himself to be the greatest, but suddenly there's evidence. His only competition has been removed, he's proven himself to be the greatest, and that is justification that he deserves to be the god of the new world. To Light, he has been entirely vindicated and he can do no wrong. But it is that exact overconfidence, this belief that he could outwit anyone and that he could do no wrong, that causes him to get sloppy and to ultimately be defeated by Nier. And I know a lot of people hate Nier and the whole section of the story after L, but I would argue that this is just as, if not more important than L's section. Is it less entertaining? Oh, absolutely. But it also completes Light's arc, and the ending of the series would be hollow without it. In writing and designing character arcs, there are things called the lie that a character believes, and it's often used as a basis for the arc and actions that a character will take. The lie that Light believes is that he is superior to everyone else and that he has a right to decide what justice is. And the natural progression for a character with this belief is to learn the value that others have to offer and to realize that they aren't the be-all end-all. But Light's journey has a hiccup in it. He defeats L and never gets this realization. To him, this is a cause to double down on his beliefs rather than to grow as a character, and that's why the Nier section is important. Light defeating L subverts the expectation of character growth, and his loss to Nier corrects things back to a path of growth. In a way, Death Note subverts its own subversion, and that's what makes the series so special. So what does this mean for writing characters with a god complex? It means that you can pursue the lie that the character believes, but this type of character also needs to have a resolution. Unless the point of the series is to make this character an actual god, they have to hit reality at some point. Now, for this next section, I wanted to talk about Griffith from Berserk, as it's a name that was suggested in the comments repeatedly. But it's been years since I watched the series, and I haven't actually made time to read the manga yet, which I know is a sin. So instead, I'm going to pass things over to Nux, because I know he'll be able to do this section more justice than I ever could.
Thanks, Axel, for having me. Always a pleasure to talk about my man Griffith. Now, I want to have a very interesting little discussion here. You asked me to talk about Griffith in respect to being a villain with a god complex. And while I definitely think he's an amazing villain, a god-tier villain, a villain of a man who became a damn near god, god complex is a very interesting way to describe him. Griffith is a dude who started a band of mercenaries called the Band of the Hawk. They did their typical mercenary things until eventually he was caught sleeping with the king's daughter, which was extremely awkward for the daughter and the king. He was incarcerated, tortured, cut to pieces, broken apart mentally and physically. Eventually he was saved by the Band of the Hawk. Guts, the person that supported him the most until this point, overheard him saying that he only viewed Guts as a tool. This is an incredibly well-written character and well-crafted story, so obviously this little breakdown here is not going to do it justice. But just to hone in on the big points, he then caused something called the Eclipse. It was this incredibly dramatic and horrifying scene at the end of the Berserk 1997 anime and concluding the Berserk Golden Age arc, where he sacrificed every single character we knew in this story so far, except for Guts and Casca, effectively sacrificing them and absorbing their power, where they can become the literal mountain of corpses he stands on to attain heaven, in order for him to become Femto, one of the God Hand, one of the strongest demons alive, someone of incredible power, incredible worth, and incredible impact on the world around him. And this was when the true villain Griffith was born. Through the most insane utilitarian motives ever, in order to achieve all of his dreams, all of the people that he viewed as tools in his lifetime, even though they should have been viewed as friends and compatriots, were sacrificed, body and soul. Our main character, Guts, was branded, hunted down for eternity by demons because he was also branded as a sacrifice to this end. Thus begins the dichotomy of Guts and Griffith throughout the rest of the story, and it's incredibly powerful as far as character writing, but it's even more powerful as far as this more god complex aspect that Axel asked me to talk about. There's absolutely no way I'll do Griffith justice in just 5 minutes, because that's my slot here. And I'm definitely going to be making a video on him on my second channel at some point soon, because I've been putting all my analyses there. But Griffith is someone from that point on who created an amazing paradise, a utopia called Falconia. He created it by being the beacon in the darkness. He managed to set up a chain of events that had every single human being view him as the Messiah. When humans and demons were murdering each other, well, mostly demons muting humans, he was the man, the one man, the ray of light, the beacon in the darkness that was able to save humanity. He creates this utopia called Falconia, a country where he is the ruler, where he is the Messiah, where humans can finally be safe from demons, even though this entire demonic uprising was something that he crafted himself. After the eclipse, we get very little insight into the mind of Griffith. We can see his actions and we can try to interpret what he's thinking throughout this entire transpiration of events, but do we really understand his thought process through it all? That is completely open to interpretation. And that's another reason why Griffith is one of the best written characters of all time. You can understand him in so many ways. Perhaps this is no longer the human Griffith that we knew. This is the demon Griffith, someone luring humanity into a false sense of security to offer the entire country of Falconia, humanity's last living remnant, as a sacrifice for him to even become more powerful, to attain more strength. Perhaps that's his motivation. It would definitely fall in line with his character until this point. Perhaps his entire goal was to become the ultimate enemy so he could stand up as the ultimate sign of righteousness, to become revered and beloved by all. Neither of these two very possible states of mind represent a god complex. What represents a god complex the most, and this is the crazy twist, and this is why I mentioned earlier the dichotomy of Guts and Griffith, because what represents this god complex attitude of his the most, even though god complex is not the words I would use to define any of his motivations, looking at him in a microcosm, looking at him from his own perspective or from his own actions, but I would describe it looking at him as a dichotomy to Guts. Guts' character role throughout the entirety of Berserk is that he's the ultimate human character. He takes humanity and will push it to its absolute limits. He is a human that's going up against fate, going up against demons, going up against the supernatural. He is the ultimate human being, the pinnacle of humanity, someone who won't stoop to the level of a demon to accomplish his goals, but he's gonna do it on his own footing as a human being. Griffith is the dichotomy of that. Griffith views Guts as a completely opposing ideology, and that is where Griffith has his godly tendencies. Griffith thinks he's more than a man. Griffith doesn't feel like he needs to stoop to the level of a higher power to attain his goals. He believes he is the higher power. The beautiful of a dichotomy is that only from the light can you see how deep the darkness is. And you can only uncover the themes of Griffith because you can understand the themes of Guts. That is why Griffith is one of the greatest villains in anime. And yeah, goddammit, Axel, thank you for getting me back into Berserk for this, goddammit. Now I'm gonna make a whole bunch of Berserk videos on Nuxanor. And it's all your fault, okay? It's all your fault! Thank you for having me, though. Back to Axel.
That is right, I am the sole actor slowly whittling away at Nux until he makes more analysis videos. So be sure to check out Nuxanor, where he did a video on Toph from The Last Airbender recently, as well as a look at what went wrong with My Hero Academia, which is a topic I'm actually going to be covering in February as a retrospective to the entire series. But onto just a tad of a bit more of a modern series, we have Makima in Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man takes place in a world where the fears of humanity get manifested as devils. And the more that we fear a concept, the stronger the related devil becomes. So the Gun Devil, very strong. Marshmallow Devil, not so strong. And Makima is the Control Devil. And let me tell you, the idea of control is terrifying. As the embodiment of control, Makima inherently believes that she has the right to have control over everyone else. And as a devil, she believes herself to be greater than all humanity by default. But even amongst devils, Makima is unique. Her greatest power is the ability to manipulate others. While other devils can forge contracts with humans, in their case, the human has to accept their conditions. But Makima can force other people or other devils to accept her conditions regardless of what they are. Typically, these agreements are, at least on the surface, mutually beneficial, but Makima can go up to anyone, tell them to agree to whatever she wants, and they have to do it. Not only that, but they forget the entire event even happened, enabling her to do just about anything she wants to with no consequence. At one point, she even convinces the Prime Minister of Japan to trade his people's lives to her in exchange for her working as a devil hunter. However, this trade was entirely in Makima's favor. What it actually meant is that when a devil popped up, she would be the first one to know about it and could make a contract to control them, only increasing her own power in doing so. And on the other end of the bargain, if Makima was to take any fatal damage, She would instead be resurrected immediately, and a random member of the Japanese population would get an illness in place of her actually dying, meaning that she is effectively immortal and unkillable in 99% of situations. But there's an interesting note in Makima's character. Her entire goal is to keep elevating her position to become greater and to have more control over others. Essentially, she wants to become royalty or a god, ruling over everyone. But at the same time, there is a person that she idolizes and is actually a fan of. Makima looks up to Chainsaw Man. So while she has this god complex and she believes that 100%, no question, she is better than everyone else, she also absolutely believes that Chainsaw Man is better than she is. And that's where her version of a god complex becomes so interesting. In most situations, a god complex is stemmed from an innate sense of superiority. But to Makima, it doesn't matter if other people are superior to her, because they can always be brought down to her level and then placed under her control. She sees Chainsaw Man as this icon of power, but not as someone who can't be manipulated. Makima picks up Denji as a pet and introduces him to a better life, giving him a found family in Aki and power, and builds up his position in the public eye, making him a pseudo-celebrity. But all of that becomes a weapon for her. She takes away his new life, she eliminates his new family, and with people showing love and not fear for Chainsaw Man, he is weakened and brought to her level, and from here, she can become greater than he is. Makima has this really unique perspective on this archetype of characters, as she is enough of a realist to know where she stands, but at the same time she is willing to rip other people down to change that reality and place herself above them. And our first non-anime rep for the episode is Nolan Grayson from Invincible. Like Makima, Omni-man is not human and believes he is inherently better than everyone else. Basically, Omni-man is a spin on the Superman archetype of characters. However, he comes as a conqueror rather than someone seeking refuge from a planet being destroyed. Nolan's story begins across the universe on a planet called Viltrum, an advanced society that, through eugenics and eliminating the weak, has grown to produce only super beings. With an army of these all-powerful Viltrumites, they would go on to conquer and dominate every planet they came across. However, as their empire continued to expand, it would become unrealistic to invade each planet with their army. So instead, they shifted their path forward. From here on, one Viltrumite officer would be sent to planets all over the universe, and over the next 500 years, the plan would be for them to weaken or conquer that planet. And Nolan, as you might expect, would be the Viltrumite sent to Earth. Now, we also have a bit of a light Yagami situation here as well. The Viltrumites looked at a universe filled with conflict and strife and believed that by producing super beings and conquering everyone else, they could bring peace. And as such, Nolan, who had been indoctrinated in the supremacist ways of Viltrum, believed himself to be both a conqueror and a peacekeeper, a messiah on his way to welcome a new planet into the peaceful empire of Viltrum. By force, if necessary. When he arrived on Earth, he picked up the pseudonym Omni-man and presents himself as a superhero, hiding away who and what he really is. Now, we gotta talk about Nolan's role as a hero real quick, because it is an interesting one. Nolan, firstly, genuinely believes that he is doing something good and just by leading the Earth towards joining the Viltrumite Empire. Secondly, he typically will do good. He saves countless lives, he stops meteors, he fights crime, but he wants to save humanity not because it's the right thing to do, but because if they're wiped out, then he will have failed his mission of expanding the Empire. So it's kind of a right things for the wrong reasons situation. And finally, while he sees value in the whole of the human race, he does not see value in the individual. For example, he specifically says that while he cares about his wife, it's more in the way that you might look at a pet. Nolan's real arc in the story begins when his son Mark begins to awaken his powers, though. Having a second Viltrumite and being ready to conquer the Earth, Nolan begins to make his moves, and the first of which is taking on the Guardians of the Globe. So in the Invincible universe, it's kind of similar to the DC Comics version. There are superheroes, supervillains, and everything in between, and the Guardians of the Globe are effectively the Invincible version of the Justice League. The best of the best, the strongest of the strongest, complete with Darkwing, War Woman, Red Rush, Aquarius, Martian Man, and the Green Ghost. While not a member, Omni-man was a close associate and collaborator. That said, despite the Guardians of the Globe initially being depicted as a fairly important force in the world, What they actually were tools for building up how the audience sees Omni-Man. In the first episode, we see the Guardians coming together to fight the Mauler twins, and it's standard superhero team spectacle. The whole fight acts as a showcase to see how amazing these heroes are. However, they eventually do get pushed back, and it isn't until Omni-Man shows up to save and assist them that they manage to win. So we have this super team who's all incredibly strong, and Omni-Man kind of being shown to be the most capable, but it isn't clear to what degree yet. However, that changes when we reach the ending of the first episode, where Omni-Man calls all of the Guardians together and begins slaughtering them, fighting them off all at once, and while they do manage to push him pretty hard, he still kills every single member. Nolan believes himself to be the strongest on Earth, and with this action, he has proof of it. Not only did he kill the strongest heroes that humanity had to offer, but he fought them all at once. He is greater than the accumulation of all of Earth's power. And in this moment, the audience immediately understands just how intimidating, dominating, and brutal this so-called hero actually is. He is a giant surrounded by ants, and there is no doubt left in anyone's mind. As the story continues, he eventually comes clean to Mark, and they fight in the climax of the season. But despite what he says and what he thought his beliefs were, he is unable to pull the final punch to kill his son. There is a shred of humanity in this alien conqueror that has bubbled to the surface. And unable to complete his task, Omni-Man instead opts to fly into space, ending the first season and waiting to return in the second season. Now, I want to go back to the idea of Nolan seeing humanity as less than himself, because to Nolan, human life in isolation is an insignificant speck, even when looking at people who are spectacular, such as the people in the Guardians of the Globe. There are billions of people living lives less than 100 years long, and in comparison to himself, someone who lives thousands of years, who is nearly indestructible, and who is all-powerful, they just don't mean anything. He makes the point later in the series when talking to his son that the father he grew up with his entire life, the 17 years or so they had spent together, was incomprehensibly small in the grand scheme of how long Nolan had lived. To make a comparison, each human that Nolan meets and spends 50 years with is essentially the equivalent of us walking down the street, petting a random dog that we don't know, and then never seeing that dog again. Are we excited by the dog? Absolutely. Can it make us happy? And can we even find value in it? Definitely. But 5 or 10 years down the line for us, we will never think of that dog again, let alone hundreds or thousands of years down the line. And sure, in cases where that person is particularly close to Nolan, like with his wife, he might consider them to be like a family dog rather than a random one, and they might have an impact on some level, but that's about the most that humanity can give to him. Personally, I've always been super interested in the idea of immortality in storytelling. And yeah, Nolan is not truly immortal, but the dude lives countless human lifetimes long, you know what I mean. The idea of building relationships with humans when you are immortal seems like at some point it would become pointless and completely depressing. Watching every person around you die one after another as you go on unchanged has got to do something to you that numbs you. And it's not hard to understand Nolan's perspective here. Obviously, we're not excusing it, we're not agreeing with it, but I do understand why he might see one person of the 8 billion humans on Earth dying as something insignificant, especially when to him, human life as a whole is negligible. Importantly though, characters are not flat and unchanging things. And using this idea of numbness and apathy towards humanity as both a climax for the first season of Invincible, as well as a launching point for the rest of Nolan's character, is incredibly smart. Omni-Man gets a lot of things right. He is a masterclass in presenting a godlike figure while also having a god complex. Both the audience and the characters in the show itself recognize him to be this unstoppable force, and when used in combination with the moral complications that come along with being an alien conqueror and nearly immortal, he suddenly becomes this very three-dimensional character that the audience is both terrified of and completely intrigued with. He is a perfect depiction of someone who justifiably sees himself as a god on Earth, and through having a son, we can begin to watch him as he slowly questions how he sees the world around him. So, let's talk Kuroko, a series all about high school basketball where a generation of miracles appears and dominates the competition with their incredible abilities. From seeming invisible on the court, to making three-point shots from anywhere or copying your opponent's techniques, every member of this group is amazing in some way that just makes them inherently better or more valuable than other players. And yes, when we're talking about something like talent and how it connects to a god complex, there are plenty of other series that I could have chosen to talk about, but I think specifically with sports series, there can be an objective measure of people's value, and that's really interesting. You can see how many points they score, you can see how they work on their team, you can see their leadership abilities, and you can see the difference between their skills and other people's at face value. You're dealing with hard numbers and facts rather than just the idea of being better than someone. And the fact of the matter is that these players are just more talented than anyone else. When it comes to Kuroko, I think the go-to example is probably Akashi, the leader of the Generation of Miracles, and someone who is effectively able to see into the future to dominate his opponents through this ability. However, if I'm going to be honest, I think Aomine offers a much more interesting look at a character with a god complex. This is because while Akashi is a character built around the concept of being obsessed with winning, Aomine instead is a character who is convinced that they cannot lose. They are overflowing with talent, and that talent develops a god complex within them that shapes their character. Aomine was originally a pretty happy dude who played basketball because he loved it. He even convinces Kuroko to keep playing the game when he's feeling like he just isn't good enough to continue. To Aomine at this time though, Kuroko's dedication to training was more important than lacking talent. Just the effort he was putting in made him more valuable in Aomine's eyes, ultimately launching their friendship and inspiring Aomine himself to train harder. But this extra training would slowly cause things to change over time. Aomine was the first of the Generation of Miracles to awaken their abilities, and because of that, he kind of led the charge in creating a gap between them and everyone else. He still loved the game, but suddenly he was winning games by larger and larger margins, until eventually they'd win by double or triple points, or by scoring over 200 points in one game. At first this was exciting and there was nothing malicious about it, but all the same he was kind of accidentally crushing his opponents and their love for the game every time he played. And I do mean every time. It got to the point where they just never lost. No one could keep up with them, no one could score as many points, and the game that he loved suddenly became boring and dull because there was no real competition. And this is where he really begins to shift. He stops going to practices as he believes there's already no point, because he's just better than everyone else. But also because he knows that if he continues to practice and get better at the game, the gap will just keep widening and no one will ever be able to compete with him. He'll never be able to play the game he loves again in the way he loves to do it. Worse yet though, he begins to resent his opponents for not challenging him. He's beginning to hate this game because they can't keep up with him, so he decides to weed out the weak. He goes into every game planning to absolutely destroy the opponents, to demoralize them, and basically trying to get them to give up on basketball. If they aren't going to challenge him, if they're so weak that he can't enjoy the game, then they don't deserve to play at all. It's kinda brutal, but as rough as it is, that's kinda the thing about Aomine's god complex. It's justified, to some level at least. No matter how you look at it, Aomine is just factually better than other people when it comes to basketball. He doesn't have to be as big a dick about it as he is, but no matter how you spin it, he is just better. And the only people who can really challenge him are the other members of the generation, and they're all on his team, so it just doesn't matter. And even when they do split apart and go to other schools, there's still only one other member of the generation on each team, and one-on-one he still outclasses all of them, picking up a habit of saying one of the cheesiest catchphrases in all of anime: "The only one who can beat me is me." And yeah, it sounds like a lot of bravado and overconfidence, but it just isn't. He actually is that talented. Which brings up an interesting point. If Aomine really is this talented, then it's kind of natural for him to feel this way. If you have LeBron James playing basketball with high schoolers, they're probably going to be a bit overconfident as well, and that's kind of why talent is such an interesting area of conversation when it comes to god complexes. It's easy to justify. Oftentimes, characters with a god complex put themselves above others in their own head. Like when you look at Vegeta, yes, he is strong, but when you think about how highly he sees himself in comparison to the other people that he knows exist, like the Ginyus, or Frieza, or Goku, or anyone else that he comes across in the series really, he doesn't get many W's. He often hypes himself up knowing that there are people who are much stronger than him, but acting like he is superior regardless. But Aomine doesn't have to do that. He just is superior to others. And there's quite literally a scoreboard to show him that he is correct. There's a strong sense of rationality that comes along with using a god complex in a series where sports or competition is at the core. It inherently makes these characters come with a feeling of intensity and superiority that is just difficult to argue with. You might hate these characters for being assholes, or you might hate them for being cocky, but you can't tell them they're wrong. It can make these characters feel less like they have delusional confidence and more like there's a basis for how they feel and how they see themselves. But more importantly, it gives you some wiggle room to develop them as a whole. In Aomine's case, this means that the focus of his character isn't just his confidence and self-importance, but it's also about this overbearing experience of emptiness that he feels. When you look at him after watching the series, you don't see him as this cold and cocky guy. Instead, you see him as someone who loved the game and felt like he was unable to play it in a way that he wanted to because all of the joy and challenge had been sucked out of it. And that leads to the coldness and distance that he puts up. It's not that he feels superior and looks down on people because of it. He's just been faced with a reality where other people can't compete with it, and he hates that reality. And I think it's that extra touch of depth that is very important with this kind of character. I mean, this is essentially an anime with superheroes playing basketball. The plot isn't exactly the deepest beyond let's cheer on our lads as they try to win the next tournament, but even so, Aomine's character feels full and well developed. He is the epitome of someone who doesn't just believe but knows that they are better than everyone else, and it never feels unreasonable. Does it feel a bit cheesy? Absolutely, but it's also very easy to understand where he comes from. And again, this is a basketball anime. Imagine building a character like this where we are dealing with something with actual depth and story. By making objective measures of a character's ability, you don't need to waste time telling the audience about how this character thinks they are better. You can instead show why a character knows they are better, and showing is always better than telling because with all that time you saved, you can actually flesh out their role in the story and demonstrate who they are more effectively. But we can't just talk about basketball boys all day as much as I would love to. Let's move on to something a lot more manly and only a little bit more homoerotic with Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, where a character's god complex is so intertwined with who they are that they are literally named Dio. Much like Aomine, who was someone who grew into their superiority complex, we also have Dio Brando. Dio was born in poverty and lived with his abusive drunk of a father, Dario, quickly becoming disenfranchised with his life and feeling like the world owed him, and eventually he would get his chance. After poisoning his father to free himself, he would be adopted by the Joestar family who was in his father's debt. Before we get into the rest of the story, we need to really focus on his mentality here. Dio develops a superiority complex not because he believes himself to actually be better than others, but because he believes that due to the misfortune he faced, he deserves to be above them. To Dio, he had unjustly experienced hardship, and to balance that out, he should also experience prosperity. And now that he had the chance at greatness, he would take out any obstacle in his way to never go back to the squalor he came from. So take everything going forward through the lens of someone who believes they deserve greatness and that they have already paid the price for it. Dio moves into the Joestar mansion and immediately comes face to face with his new adopted brother, Jonathan. As a whole, anyone who treats Dio with respect or who looks up to him gets treated pretty favorably by him at this point, but Jonathan was different. To Dio, Jonathan represents an obstacle in becoming the sole heir to the Joestar fortune, and as a result, he would spend the entirety of their youth together trying to disgrace, discourage, and destroy Jonathan. He would beat him up, bully him, kiss the girl he loved, and show himself more capable in their father's eyes. But one day, Jonathan would manage to stand up for himself, and Dio would be forced to buy his time until adulthood. Again, Dio begins poisoning his father just as he had in the past, but Jonathan finds him out. He gets the police involved, and suddenly Dio is faced with reality. He actually has a speech while being confronted that I think sums up his mentality quite well, explaining that he understands himself not to be perfect. He says that being human means you have limits, and the more you try to scheme and skirt around those limits, the more unexpected things will happen. So instead, he decides to throw away his humanity and move towards being something greater. By using the stone mask, Dio becomes a vampire, an ultimate, unkillable life form with unimaginable capabilities. I spoke earlier about Omni-man and how he represented an all-powerful person being introduced to humanity, but Omni-man comes from power and has only known power. To this point, Dio has come from nothing and believed himself to be superior only to be shown that he has never been enough. But suddenly he is given the power to prove that superiority. Rather than a character with a god complex gaining humanity, Dio's story is instead someone tossing away their humanity so that they can become a god. Even so, Jonathan would go on to find a way to defeat Dio, cutting off his head and believing the threat to have been ended. And in this moment, Dio begins to see Jonathan as a special person who is the only one in the world who is his equal, and if not, maybe even his better. But Dio would survive being beheaded, and decides that if Jonathan is the only greater person than he is, he could just become Jonathan, or at least fuse himself with him, stealing Jonathan's body, becoming truly perfect, and no longer referring to himself as Dio Brando, but instead only being called Dio, a name which quite literally means God, and which definitely fits for a character who believes themselves to be deserving of everything the world has to offer. Next up, another non-anime addition with Homelander from The Boys, who, ironically, kind of has the same backstory as Fury King Bradley from Fullmetal Alchemist, but that's a whole other video. The world of The Boys is almost like a gritty and edgy version of Invincible that focuses on a more realistic perspective on superheroes in a capitalist society. The fact of the matter is that in a world filled with superpowered people, there are always going to be consequences and collateral damage when those powers are used. But more important than the lives of average people lost in the wake of these superheroes is the money that can be made from them. It's all about the money, honey, and your friends at Vought International are here to make sure that these heroes stay profitable and pesky things like accidental manslaughter don't get in the way of their popularity. And when it comes to heroes, there is one that stands above all the rest. That's right, the world's greatest hero, Homelander. Okay, enough of that voice. It's basically a series talking about the negative implications of capitalistic greed in a superhero society and how profiting from good deeds blurs the line between what is good and what is right. And when one hero is emblematic of that system as a whole, he is inherently going to be the best example of it. In a world fueled by self-interest, the commodification of good deeds, and creating an illusion of perfection to build up your public image, Homelander is, well, to put it as some of the other characters in the show do, a fucking psycho, an inhuman monster, a man-child, a paranoid malignant narcissist, and of course,
A right cunt named Homelander.
so you know, he has a few issues to say the least. But no matter what Homelander does, it is indisputable that he is the strongest hero in the picture. And that's because he was quite literally bred for perfection using the DNA of the previous greatest hero, Soldier Boy. Homelander would be raised in a lab with no family to speak of, other than the doctors who experimented on him and put him through surgeries to test the limits of his abilities. He would have his hand forced into a furnace, he was boiled alive, he was forced to fight the guards. But he didn't just get physically tormented, they also tried brainwashing him, locking him in a room and forcing him to watch images meant to mold him into the perfect all-American hero. In reality though, everything he was going through as a child would eventually split his personality, leaving a very positive but fragile version of himself for when things were good, and one version who is there to, quote, get through the bad room. Jonah Vogelbaum, the one leading the experiment, would look back and regret saying that Homelander should have been raised in a home with a family that loved him. But Homelander responds, "And yet I turned out great." And that should tell you a lot about where his mentality is. Regardless of the situation, he is always looking at himself as if nothing is wrong, and as though he is the image of perfection. And this is something that nearly everyone around him would reinforce, because the fact of the matter is, when you have an impertinent man-baby with all the self-esteem of a high school girl being bullied, but who also has the ability to blast laser beams through your head with a glance to throw you into space, or to wipe New York off the map, it is pretty natural to be terrified of him and to want to keep him happy. The duality in Homelander is such an interesting thing, and it's a kind of horrifying part of his character. On the one hand, you have this invulnerable man who could end life on Earth over a weekend if he wanted to. But on the other hand, mentally he is just a child who needs constant positive affirmation or he will fall apart. Ironically, this causes everyone around him to walk on eggshells and never truly allow him into their lives, turning his fears of isolation and rejection into a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this gets worse when Starlight challenges him and threatens to release the Flight 37 video. And backed into a corner, Homelander doubles down, telling her that she could absolutely do that. And sure, he would lose everything, but then he would have nothing left to lose. He is a self-centered tyrant with the power of a god, but while he has status and the love of the public, he wouldn't intentionally take that away from himself. He enjoys it too much. But if someone else took it from him, then he is free to destroy everything. It is the modern equivalent of making a sacrifice to a volcano in hopes it doesn't erupt. Or as he puts it,
I'd prefer to be loved. I would. But if you take that away from me, being feared is A1 okie doke by me. Because I am the Homelander. And I really can do whatever the fuck I want.
we often think of characters with a god complex as someone who is confident, powerful, believes themselves to be perfect. And I think a big part of that comes from the origin of the term. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this was used in the early 1900s and often referred to a monotheistic, perfect god. In the most popular monotheistic religions like Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, the god in those stories is perfect, above humans, all-powerful, and all-knowing, as long as you aren't looking at like the Old Testament. However, interestingly, the majority of gods throughout history are not like this, especially in pantheistic beliefs. If we look at Greek myth, for example, the Trojan War was started over the jealousy, pride, and lack of integrity of Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. Zeus is essentially a pervert with anger issues. Poseidon kinda has the same thing going on, but slightly less of a pervert sometimes. Hades is resentful towards his brothers. Hephaestus is famously ugly and deformed. The gods are not perfect in these stories. They are powerful, they stand above people, but they are not perfect. And it's often the ones with the most humanity reflected in them that have the most flaws. And that is where Homelander can be found. All powerful, but with very human emotions that dictate his actions. Not all gods are created equal, and neither are all god complexes. And speaking of the gods of old, our last character in the video will be our first video game representative with Atreus from God of War. Now, a couple of things really quick. Yes, I know Atreus isn't a villain, but I am going to be looking at a very specific set of actions at a certain point of the 2018 game. Second, I just got into God of War very recently. I have only played the 2018 game, so please do not spoil Ragnarok. That would be a dick move. But with those out of the way, we can get into it. God of War follows Kratos, the leader of a Spartan army who sells his soul to Ares in exchange for saving his army in a tight spot. Now under Ares' employ, Kratos would eventually be sent to wipe out a village. However, unbeknownst to him, both his wife and child would be there, and he ended up slaughtering both of them. Ares believed this would allow him to become a greater servant and warrior, but instead it enraged Kratos, setting him on a campaign to eliminate the gods of Olympus. Years later, after killing all of the gods, he would leave Greece and try to start a life as a normal person. He falls in love with Faye, they have a son that he names Atreus, and that is a very brief version of the story so far, leading into God of War 2018. At the beginning of the game, we join Kratos and Atreus just after Faye dies, and they set off to spread her ashes on the highest peak in all the realms. But this time it is Kratos being hunted as the Norse gods Balder, Modi, and Magni are sent by Odin to find him for some unknown reason. It is an incredibly heartfelt game, and if you haven't played it, I cannot recommend it enough. However, more than anything, what makes this story so special is the dynamic between Kratos and Atreus. Being raised a Spartan and taught to be stoic, Kratos isn't exactly the most open and doting father. Don't get me wrong, he clearly loves his son, he teaches him valuable lessons, and he would die for him without question, but he doesn't know how to openly show those emotions. and these aren't really things that kids would latch onto and fully appreciate. For most of Atreus' life growing up until Faye died, Kratos wasn't really around. He would be off trying to learn to control his rage. And now that he's in his life, they're so disconnected that he calls him boy rather than his name. He rarely speaks if not spoken to, and he's just kind of this massive, angry Greek man covered in ashes and blood, which can be super imposing, believe it or not. So to say their relationship is impersonal is maybe an understatement. But one of the biggest hitches in their relationship is that Kratos refuses to tell Atreus who and what he is. He has always hated the gods and told his son not to trust them, but he has never told him why. Nor did he tell him that he was a god, or that because Atreus was his son, so was Atreus. And this was for plenty of reasons. Kratos describes being a god as a cursed existence full of loss and grief, and he wanted to spare Atreus from that life. He knows that gods are marked for death and will always need to fight for their survival. Second, he hates the gods so much, and his son is a god, which might make Atreus think that his father hates him. And then you just have the trauma aspect of it. He just doesn't want to talk or think about his past, about slaughtering his wife and daughter, about enacting vengeance and killing the other gods, or murdering his own father. Believe it or not, they're not exactly things he is proud of. To Kratos, gods are selfish. They're dangerous beings that live on forever. He essentially sees every other god as Homelander. There should be responsibility that comes with power, but there are rarely any gods who act responsibly. So he believes that it is a much happier and simpler life to just live as a mortal. Basically, it turns out that every god has a god complex. Go figure. Around the midpoint of the game, Atreus becomes sick though. Believing himself to be mortal, his body would reject itself, and Kratos is forced to tell him the truth. However, he only tells Atreus that they are both gods, and nothing about the life he had led up to this point, nor about the lives he has taken. And that brings us up to the point in the story that I want to talk about. Atreus, up until now, has been a very kind, considerate boy. He is also so goddamn useless in a fight. Like, homie, please fire some goddamn air. Sorry, that is built up from my playthrough of the game. It is not for right now. But yeah, the point is, he is a super sweet kid, and his defining feature was that he wanted to help other people. He is a good person. But now he's not just a person. He's a god. And with that knowledge in hand, he begins to change. He becomes annoyed by the personal struggles of mortals, seeing them as beneath him, even telling his friend Sindri that he is a little person with little problems. He becomes arrogant, boastful, condescending, and more than anything, he becomes cruel. Atreus and Kratos had just fought Modi and Magni, killing Magni during the battle, and Modi manages to escape, running to his father Thor for help. But Thor rejects him, calling him a coward and beating him within an inch of his life for not dying in battle. So now Modi has showed up again, cursing Atreus and Kratos for what they had done to him, and Kratos tells Atreus to leave him be because he's already been beaten and he is not worth killing. But Atreus, now fueled by this feeling of superiority from being a god, responds saying that because he's a god, he can do whatever he wants. Then stabbing Modi in the neck and kicking him into a pit. And after killing a god, all he has to say is that the quality of his knife has gotten better, and he does not even consider his actions at all. He then tells Kratos that he had been taught to kill this entire time, only for Kratos to correct him and explain that he had been teaching him to survive, to defend himself, and not to attack others. And this is what I want to focus on. Power and status can quickly change people. As the saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Being told he is a god turns Atreus into the type of god that Kratos has told him to be wary of. His entire life he has only heard that gods are this way, and now that he is a god, he has embraced that. It brings into play all the things we talked about in every character in this video so far. He is suddenly more than those around him. He is not that sickly, good person that he was, he is suddenly more than those around him. He has power. He will live long enough that the mortals around him will seem like flashes before him. And most of all, he feels as though he has the right to do anything he wants. And when you have those things, power, time, and status, it is so easy to be selfish. It can be easy to be selfish without those things. So especially in a child, and even more so in one who is a good person, it is extremely easy to see how thinking you are superior or actually being superior can warp your perception of the world around you. To Atreus, being a god means being like his father and the other gods that he knew of. It means being angry and selfish and cold, but to Kratos, it means something entirely different. After scolding his son for his new attitude towards the world and warning him that there is still time to return to how he was, as well as Atreus himself reliving his cruelty in Helheim, Kratos takes a moment to speak to his son. He talks to him about how much he has grown over this journey, and Atreus asks him if he is a man now, just like his father. But Kratos says no, because they are not men. They are more than that, and that means they have far greater responsibility, telling his son that he must be better than his father was. The reason I wanted to end this video with God of War is because discipline and self-control play such a major part in Kratos' philosophy in the game. And throughout the entirety of the story, we see him trying to strike this balance of teaching his son the values of those things, while also not turning him into the seemingly emotionless brick wall of a man that his father was. Being a god means having tremendous power and the ability to do whatever you want, sure. But to Kratos, it's not about being superior, it's about being better. Being better means that you are responsible and disciplined enough to take that power and funnel it into doing something good. And it's the characters who fail to act responsibly, who fail to be selfless, and who fail to be better that we see a god complex arising in. It is in the pursuit of greatness that these characters fail to find goodness, and that is the difference between someone who sees themselves as a god and someone who is truly something better. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and until next time, stay excellent and be better.